How you doing out there? It's Stephen Holder with Zach Keefer, and I guess this is Chopping Wood, I think.
Chopping Wood lives on.
For now. We got to talk through that, don't we? We haven't really had that conversation.
It's part of who we are.
Yeah, we really can't go. I mean, are we just going to make an executive decision here? Are we going to keep Chopping Wood? Is that what we're doing?
We're open to suggestions, but for me, Chopping Wood is synonymous with our podcast, synonymous with the Colts.
And just think of it as a tribute to Chuck Pagano, because look, he probably didn't win enough games, but we love Chuck Pagano just because, I mean, look, he birthed Chopping Wood, all right? Without Chuck Pagano, there is no Chopping Wood. So I think he is owed that much.
Yeah.
So shout out to Chuck Pagano. Now, Zach's back, all right? Zach was busy. He had a life-changing event. I don't know, a little something going on at home.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that, Zach? You had a baby? Is that like a big deal or something?
It's been a big deal, yeah. For all the moms and dads out there, you know how much that changed your life and how little sleep you get right away. But everyone does it. It's been a blast. We're just kind of waiting around and finding out information about who the next coach is going to be.
Yeah. Before we go on, the best part and worst part of a newborn are what?
A lot of people told me it might not hit you right away after the birth, and that was not the case with me. It hit me right away. She came on Christmas Eve, which was kind of funny. We had a choice, Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. We went with Christmas Eve. So the best part was right when she arrived. It was amazing. The worst part would be just everybody knows this. I mean, you're just dying to get some sleep, and it's impossible to get sleep. So you're round the clock. If you get 3 consecutive hours of sleep, it feels like a huge win. It feels like a vacation. But it's been a blast all told.
Yeah, no, it's worth it.
And it worked out well because, instead of a playoff game working 70 hours a week, it's not that. So that is a blessing in a way.
Yeah, it could be a lot worse. So anyway, we got a little bit going on, not just at home, but obviously at work as well, because the Colts need a coach. And Chris Ballard now is in we're well into week 2 of this coaching search.
Right.
After Chuck Pagano was dismissed last week. There's so much that gets thrown around out there. And I think if you guys follow us and listen to us, I think you know our tendencies by now, which is to be really conservative with information and in terms of extrapolating meanings and all those things. Like we're very cautious about that. So I would suggest you do the same thing because of who we're dealing with here. We're dealing with Chris Ballard, the Colts GM, and we were just talking about this, Zach, before we hit the record button. I mean, we've learned enough about Chris Ballard, I think, in 2017 into 2018 to know that 2 things. Number one, he is not panicked. If things change, whatever. I mean, that's always one of his go-to sayings, "We'll never panic," right? Mm-hmm. When it comes to like the roster.
If they lose a guy in the draft they really wanted, right?
Yeah. So he's going to stay in control.
We're not going to overpay. We're not going to panic and just Right.
He's extremely measured. He's in control. He's always going to be in control. Even if things change, he's always going to have a plan. But just the fact, 2 things. Number one, we don't know a lot about what's going on here. And I think that is intentional.
It does not surprise me at all from everything I know about Chris Ballard and for you as well. I think you'd agree. Mm-hmm. Before this started, so that was 10 days ago on New Year's Day, when he started this search, this is how I thought it would go. The leaks out there are probably coming from the coaches that are interviewing. They're not coming from West 56th Street, which makes you, the listener, the fan, the viewer, have to be very judicious in what you're believing and what you're not, because Chris Ballard's doing this his way, and it's not getting out there. The leaks, the misinformation, what have you. It does not surprise me that it's being conducted the manner in which it's being conducted.
Yeah. And one thing we know about him, and I've touched on this, you've touched on this, he has been preparing for this for years. Okay, yes. This is not something where, I'm a GM now. I might have to hire a coach. I mean, no. Let's talk about that a little bit. This guy, right. I think Barry Alvarez at Wisconsin, who he played for in college, gave a good nugget about this and how he saw that binder that you mentioned in the story once that basically contained Ballard's plan for how he would execute things as a general manager. And he's had this for years, long before he even got the opportunity. So, Barry Alvarez, he's been around football for a little bit, right? Maybe like 40 years. And he said, man, it was really impressive. And he just, he said this guy is, quote, not shooting from the hip. And I think everything we've seen from Chris Ballard indicates that. I mean, he's never gone into anything in his life, frankly, without a plan. And I think this candidate list, I think, has been taking shape since probably he got the job.
Right.
Okay. He talked about always having a list and that kind of thing.
He's had a list for years.
Sure.
And you cross guys off, they take a job, and vice versa. But
yeah, this is turning out to be a pretty methodical search. Would you say? I mean,
that's the first word that came to my mind when I thought about this earlier this morning. Was Chris Ballard is going to be very methodical. You're not. I would be very stunning to me if what happened in Chicago was the situation with the Colts, where they interviewed a guy, and I don't know how many guys the Bears interviewed to the point. Interviewed Matt Nagy on Sunday, a day after he lost a playoff game in Kansas City, and hired him. I mean, on the spot, essentially. That I don't believe that's going to happen with the Colts, because I think he's going to be very methodical with this entire process. I think he's going to interview a lot of guys, and I think he's going to work through it. There might be second interviews, there might be third interviews. He's not going to get this wrong in the essence of trying to get it done quickly. And the other thing that we have to mention is there's no slam dunk candidate, at least from this perception, from our outside perception. It's a weak year in a lot of people's eyes in terms of who the head coaching candidates are, and that can be proven wrong in the years that follow. There's no slam dunk candidate. If Josh McDaniels is the best candidate this year, it says a little bit about the pool. We'll see how that develops in years to come. But there's no golden goose. There's no slam dunk Jim Harbaugh waiting to be hired, which I think makes it a little bit more difficult for Chris Ballard and makes his work, that much more thorough to make sure he finds the right guy.
Yeah, I mean, that is, unless you are interested in paying, $100 million for John Gruden, which apparently they think is
their golden goose. Did you hear who they hired or who they interviewed for the Rooney Rule? I think they interviewed
not.
T. Martin, who's like
I did see that.
Assistant at the college level.
At USC, right.
I mean, that's when the Rooney Rule just becomes irrelevant.
They
wanted John Gruden. They went and got John Gruden. And they paid him a king's ransom.
Right. Yeah, that was a joke. But they knew who they wanted. I missed that press conference yesterday, but apparently it was.
Hey, Colts are at Oakland next year.
Oh, yeah.
So you'll get reunited with the former coach you covered.
We're close.
And we'll get another great road game in that wonderful venue, Oakland Alameda Coliseum.
Yeah, beautiful place. Me and John are close. No, actually, he hates my guts, actually. But that's okay. I still would have been fine with him being the coach here because he fills up your notebook. But personally, it probably would have been a rocky ride for me. But anyway, Chris Ballard, man, I would say the other thing with Chris is that this guy he's slick. Okay, I'll give you an example. The Colts, and I know this is not a huge signing, but back in free agency, they signed John Simon. And we knew of visits and we knew of guys coming through here. We knew about Sheard, that there was interest there. And so he was a guy they jumped right out and signed. And then I remember sitting at my desk one morning, and so there start being reports they signed John Simon, and apparently it was done like the day before. No one even knew the guy was here, and he ended up being a really good signing. But my point is, he had identified John Simon months before as a guy they liked, right? Or maybe not months, but certainly some time before that, they had identified him as a guy they targeted, and this was the first team he came to. They signed him straight away. But I see the coaching situation a little bit similar. We think we know who Chris Ballard has talked to, but I am not convinced we know everybody. I think there are guys he's talked to that we are not aware of.
That would not surprise me one bit.
Yeah, I'm just telling you. And generally, I think you can get some information from time to time out of the Colts front office. Like, they're not, they don't just give it away freely, but but you can glean some information.
You gotta dig,
yeah. You got to be persistent, and you can get some information. Well, that is not happening on this story, I assure you. I've tried, and it's been made very clear, no one is going to talk. Now, I'm not upset about it because they're not talking to anyone else either. So it is what it is, as long as it's a fair playing field. But that is clearly, I think, indicative of Well, that I think supports the argument that we don't know everything.
Right.
I'm just telling you.
And a couple of points to make. With the Matt Nagy situation in Chicago and Brad Childress, Andy Reid's number 2, who I believe is retiring, but has been with that staff in Kansas City, went on the radio in Chicago, said a couple things. Maybe Nagy wasn't that impressed with the Colts in the interview, and he was impressed with Ryan Pace and the Bears. That's fine. Matt Nagy can say whatever he wants. He's the new head coach in Chicago. We haven't heard what the Colts side of it is, and we don't know if the Colts were ready to offer him or even close to offering him. Maybe it went pretty poorly, and they just weren't ready.
This story has taken on a life of its own.
Let's not give too much credence into Matt Nagy. Maybe he wasn't even the guy they wanted to get.
Why? Because he's Matt Nagy?
Yeah, I mean, remember, this guy wasn't even calling plays until mid-season in Kansas City. So, hey, he could be a great coach down the line. I'm not saying he couldn't be, but let's be at the lack of information and the lack of other candidates signing. Let's not overdo what happened in Chicago over the last couple of days.
Yeah, I would just to add to that. None of us know any of this for a fact, but it sure feels like he was Chicago's first choice.
It sounds like it,
right? And that changes things.
Yeah.
And I mean, look, it's like anything. We've all been on job interviews and had situations where maybe you're seeking a job, and you kind of sense sometimes whether you're at the top of the list. Not all the time, but sometimes you can tell. And maybe that had something to do with the way the interview felt and the interaction felt. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents.
There's a couple things about Chris Ballard that come to the top of my mind when I think about what we've learned about him the last couple, last 12 months, last year since he took over. That the binder is for real. And the one thing that Barry Alvarez told me that jumped out was the relationship between the head coach and the general manager. And this is something that Ballard has talked about. He talked about it at his press conference 10 days ago. And it's something he talked about from day one. He's been in situations where that relationship was excellent throughout his career. That's really important to him. It's not going to be a two-pronged thing. They're going to be on the same page, and maybe that's why it's going to take a little while sort of to develop that relationship, maybe even in an interview with the right guy. I don't know his relationships with Josh McDaniels or Matt Patricia or whoever they're having in for interviews. Mike Vrabel, Chris Richards, Steve Wilkes. He does have a history with Dave Tobe, the special teams coordinator in Kansas City. We'll see. Or maybe this wild card candidate that may or may not be out there. Yeah. But don't overestimate the importance of the relationship between the general manager and the coach. We've seen how that has soured a franchise in this city before the last couple of years. And you heard what Chuck Pagano said the day he was fired, right? He said, Chris Ballard is one of the best men I've ever worked with in football. Think about the situation they worked under this year. I mean, Chuck was the lame duck from the minute Chris Ballard was brought in. He knew it. They had no chance to win because Andrew Luck didn't play a single down. And he still said that. And the other thing that's really stood out to me about Chris Ballard is the assistant coaching staff that this head coach puts around him is vital. And that's something he's asking these guys. Who are going to be the coordinators? Who are going to be the coaches around the head coach that develop these players? Because he's mentioned that several times throughout this year. And that's something you can really fault Chuck Pagano for. There's only been a couple players the last couple of years that have really developed, and you can see noticeable progress among them. Jack Doyle comes to mind. Early in his career here, Chuck Pagano really had a big role in Vontae Davis becoming a Pro Bowler. But beyond that,
yeah, we've seen some regression.
We've seen a lot of regression. I mean, we've seen a lot of high draft picks just do nothing. So
there's so many little pieces that go into that puzzle. You're so right about that. And,
right.
And that's, we talk about that binder. We're making this binder famous. But those are the kinds of questions I bet that are in there. And if he doesn't like the answers,
right.
Okay, then they may just move on. All right. I mean, because I don't think Chris Ballard is going to compromise.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that he gets his top target. I mean, he wants some specific things, though. There's no question about that.
Right.
So.
And look, he came into a job last year where he was basically told, Chuck's your coach for a year.
Yeah.
And he had to just take it, and he handled it probably as well as they could have. But this is a defining moment in his career. That's a fact. I mean, this is a guy that, didn't even play a down at Wisconsin. He went there to play football, got hurt, ended up being an assistant volunteer coach at the end, grinded in South Texas, worked his way up, spent a lot of time in Chicago, thought he was going to be the general manager of Chicago, didn't get that job, went to Kansas City, worked with John Dorsey. First time he's ever going to hire a head coach by himself. This is a huge part. And look, this is the coach that's going to be if it works out, the coach for Andrew Luck's prime. Just like Chris Ballard is going to build the team around Andrew Luck in his prime. And that's huge. That's huge for this franchise. It's huge for Jim Irsay and those two championships he's chasing. Not one.
Not one, but two.
Jim, you won 4 games this year. Maybe we should start with 1.
Man. What's interesting here to me is there's a couple things. I guess Josh McDaniels is obviously a guy who is a known commodity, but what do we really think about Josh McDaniels is a question that comes to mind, right? I think that he's a little bit polarizing. And the reason I think he's worth talking about is because he is the most well-known of any candidate the Colts have talked to that we know of.
Yeah.
First of all,
he was the first interview.
He was the first interview, in part because that's when the window was available. But
Correct.
That being said, he was the first interview. It's interesting, though. You can look at him in a couple different ways. You can look at him as being a vital part of what they've done in New England, which is a huge feather in your cap. Or you can look at him as the guy who totally self-destructed in Denver and thought Tim Tebow was going to be the second coming of Joe Montana.
Right.
So, which is a terrible read.
Right.
But I don't know. I'll ask you your opinion. I have an opinion on Josh McDaniels. I mean, none of us know. But
Right.
What is your sense? I mean, if he ends up being the coach here, what would your reaction be?
I'm not sold on him. And look, I could be totally wrong. Coaching under Belichick and coaching Tom Brady doesn't do a whole lot for me. Those guys are self-made. I mean, those guys are the best to ever do what they do in this league. On Josh McDaniels' side is the development of Jimmy Garoppolo, who killed it his last couple games in San Francisco. The development of Jacoby Brissett last year. Remember, they went 3-1 without Brady last year during the suspension. He has said all the right things about his time in Denver. There's a good piece by Dan Pompei about how he learned from that. And the one thing that jumped out, though, was that players did not respect him, and that's huge. And if you know Chris Ballard, you know his key word is locker room. The locker room. You can't fake a locker room. You can't manufacture a good locker room. The coach has a lot to do with that. It has a lot to do with the players you bring in, obviously. But don't underestimate that in this. Belichick can be Belichick because he's Belichick, if that makes sense, because he has all those rings. And the universal respect is there. Josh McDaniels tries to walk into Denver and be Belichick, and it blew up in his face. Would he be different in Indianapolis? Absolutely. And he does have a guy here that played with him. That's Jacoby Brissett. Jabal Sheard's a former Patriot as well. Obviously not on the offensive side of the ball. I'm just not sold on Josh McDaniels. I don't think a lot of coaches that have come from the Belichick tree have succeeded. Romery Cornell flamed out in Cleveland. Charlie Weiss flamed out in Notre Dame and Kansas. Maybe the most successful is Bill O'Brien, and he wasn't there for very long. And then he did have some head coaching experience at Penn State in a very difficult situation that he walked into that had to have helped him get to the level he's at now with Houston. So I'm not sold on Josh McDaniels. I'm not saying I have a better candidate, but the one guy I'm really intrigued about is Dave Toub. And yes, a lot of guys, you would assume that they don't go with a special teams guy. It's been done before. It's been done successfully. And you would be surprised at how many special teams coaches grow into the role of head coach. There's a detour on the way, right? They're an OC, a DC, something like that. Bill Cowher. Everyone knows about John Harbaugh. Belichick is the greatest special teams coach probably ever, right? I mean, he's the best special teams head coach ever for sure. That's an interesting name, and I do think he's sort of the wild card maybe here.
Yeah, I mean, look, that relationship.
If he can put a staff together, maybe
Well, a guy who's been around the league a long time usually
very
can.
well respected.
Yeah,
the best special teams coordinator of the last 10 years probably.
Right. And in fact, that's one of the concerns you tend to have, I think, with the younger assistant coaches is what kind of staff can they assemble, because they don't have the years of reputation.
Look at what Sean McVay did.
Yeah.
He got Wade Phillips and let Wade Phillips do his thing. Right. They have talent, obviously.
Sure.
But that was a great
That was an appealing job for Wade Phillips, I think, because of some of those guys on that defense.
Right.
But, I mean, they do have a lot of talent. But that, I think, made all the difference for him. He clearly would not be the same coach without
And look
that
at what
guy.
Chuck Pagano did in Indianapolis. The first call he made was one of the best decisions he made as the coach here was to hire Bruce Arians as the offensive coordinator.
That was the
and
best
let
hire he ever
alone
made.
the interim job that he took over and won. I think he went like 9-3.
Yeah.
That was key in Andrew Luck's development that first year.
Yeah. Look, as it relates to McDaniels, so my opinion here is, okay, I look at this two ways. I think McDaniels could be one of the best hires for Andrew Luck. I do think that I don't get caught up in offensive, defensive coach, and the guy has to be one or the other. I don't necessarily feel strongly about that, but if you do hire an offensive guy who's going to bring those principles and bring that, sort
Why
of
not the guy who's worked with the best quarterback
Yeah.
ever for 10 years?
basically,
That's a totally legitimate argument.
yeah, that would not be my reason for hiring him. I'm merely saying if they do hire him, they get that as part of the package, and I think there's something to be said for that. Now, I get distracted maybe by the Tebow connection there and what he did there. I mean, he did win some games with the guy. I'll give him credit for that, but overall I don't think that's a credit to him. It's not like a huge part of his resume, in my opinion. But I think that was so long ago that I don't get bogged down with it. I mean, look, the New England offense, it goes no matter what parts change.
Right.
But again, Tom Brady's a big reason for that. It's the system more so than the parts. But I do think you can learn a lot from that. And
he is not only the offensive coordinator; he's also the quarterback's coach.
Yeah, I think he does have a knack for that.
Right.
There's no question about that.
And to your point, if you're gonna play the Andrew Luck card, play it, right.
You're right.
He's your best asset. Maximize your best asset. Go get the best quarterback coach you can find. Make him the head coach and see what happens. If you're arguing for Josh McDaniels, pretty strong argument you can make.
Yeah.
Then again, the defense is awful, and you need to fix the defense too.
Well, that's where the question comes in. Who's your staff going to be? Who's going to be on your staff? And I would think that Josh McDaniels, having been a head coach before, he's done this before. He's built a staff before. I got to think that he's made these calls well in advance. Hey, if I got a job, what would your interest level be in joining me? Right? I mean, those conversations do happen.
Right.
And I think people need to understand that. I mean, it's not like. And I wrote a story about, what if the Patriots go to the Super Bowl, right? And are you now forced to hire a guy in February, the first week of February, and what does that do to your prospects?
It's not just the head coach, because that's going to be sealed up. It's the staff you put around him and how much of a delay that causes you.
Right, and that's where having a guy who knows this process and can attract talent is important, and he can go, get some guys to commit to that before they even get to Minneapolis in the Super Bowl. I like how we're putting the Patriots in the Super Bowl, by the way. I mean, which is not a stretch.
50-50 chance at this point, right?
At least.
Yeah.
I want to circle back to one thing. We talked a lot about Ballard at the opening, but one thing we talked about before we started recording this that we did not get to was the Chris Ballard you see in the press conference, you, the listener. We kind of talked about this before, Zach and I. That is not the full picture of Chris Ballard. And I want people to understand this. Who is, Zach, who is the other Chris Ballard, and how does that, in your opinion, relate to what they're doing here in this process?
Right. So there are two sides, really. I mean, there's the public face. There's the nice guy, laughs at all the jokes, wears a lot of Lululemon.
He does.
But this guy is as competitive as an executive we've seen. He's extremely animated during games. He's extremely blunt when assessing his players and their performances. And he just went through a 4-12 season, so there was a lot of disappointment to comb through. And do not underestimate that. I mean, this was a difficult season, and a lot was thrown on his plate he didn't expect. I.e. the quarterback. I mean, everyone in that building expected the quarterback to be back by the end of maybe the first month of the regular season. Don't get that twisted.
Right.
But, look, just know that Chris Ballard is going to be very methodical with this, one. And two, he is as cutthroat a competitor as you're going to find out there. Do not just take him at his appearance and his smiling demeanor. There's a lot more competitive fire burning under there. I mean, he wants to kill you. I mean, he is a very competitive person, and I think that will come through in the interviews, and I think that's why this will be such a difficult process for maybe some of these candidates who are trying to get this job.
He's going to put him through the ringer, I think.
Right. I think there's going to be a lot more of that than people realize.
Yeah, and I think this is something to keep in mind no matter what we're talking about.
Right.
Any type of organizational decision they're making, this is who he is. And the guy pushing the buttons is not, this, aw shucks South Texas guy with the accent. No, I mean, he is, and he is everything he appears to be, right? Like, he's an extremely likable guy. He's genuine. I think people around the league, like, they love the guy, right? He's really everything you think he is.
That stands out. Yeah.
Yes. However, he is. I think you used the word cutthroat. That's absolutely my word. He wants to destroy you, and he will not settle. He just won't settle. And I know I talk a lot about my conversations with Frank Gore on here, right? So I'll tell you another conversation with Frank Gore. Frank Gore has had a lot of conversations, intimate conversations with Chris Ballard, because Frank, sort of gravitates to the personnel guys, right? He wants to be a scout one day.
That'd be awesome if he did that too.
Can you imagine Frank Gore as a scout?
That'd be awesome.
Nah, that guy
I like
sucks.
listening to his scouting reports on the Colts.
I know. Well, some of that stuff we can't share because it's too blunt. But
it's so good.
Oh my God. But Frank Gore assessing a player, even his own teammate, is like the best thing in the world. But just imagine Frank in a draft room. He'd probably be like, that guy sucks.
They should make that a reality
show.
Yeah,
that guy sucks. I never want to hear his name again. He would probably say
that guy's not a football player.
He's not a football player.
That's what he was
It's
saying.
the worst thing you could say about a guy.
That's the ultimate compliment. If you were a football player in Frank Gore's eyes.
But anyways, staying on subject here. So what Frank Gore has told me about his conversation with Chris Ballard, he routinely, and I know you've heard him say this, he routinely comes back and he says, that guy wants toughness. That guy wants a team that punches you in the mouth. Now, that has never been the Colts.
Frank Gore wants that. It never happened when he was in Indianapolis.
Right.
It's never been the Colts.
So who's that guy? Who's that candidate, right? I don't know. That's a rhetorical question. But I'm just telling you, that's what he wants. And I think that's
what this team needs in a head coach, and it is the opposite of Chuck Pagano. And I'll tell you a story of an interaction I had with Chris Ballard. I don't think he would mind. This was after their first preseason practice of the year. If you remember, it was at Lucas Oil Stadium. It was one of those fan practices where they kind of just run around in jerseys and run through some drills, but it's for the fans. It's not for the football team's development. And I saw him afterward, and he was not happy. He wanted his guys to start hitting each other, and he was very blunt about that. I'll leave it at that. But the sort of extra stuff that goes into the preseason and all that stuff, he wanted to get down to the work. And he was not happy that they had to wait maybe an extra day to have a practice at Lucas Oil Stadium. So that was sort of a peek into how he was thinking at that point. And boy, did he! I mean, he didn't even know how long of a year he was in for. Neither did we at that point.
No.
But I agree. That's what he's looking for. And the one thing you have to point out with that, it's going to take some time to get that flipped.
Yeah.
Because they're a soft team right now. They went 4-12. They couldn't move the ball in offense the last month of the season. They need more of those guys, more of those football players, in Frank Gore's words. It's going to take a while to get there, but the coach can change the demeanor of the team very quickly.
Yeah. I think they have the beginnings of it. They started with last year's free agent class, and there are some tough guys in there, I thought.
Simon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, guys
Hunt
like that.
Played well.
Yeah.
Mingo was solid in the backup role. A lot of
Al Woods, right? I mean, now he's not a long-term guy. He's 30 years old.
He's the perfect guy, though.
But Al Woods is the kind of guy who would probably play football in a concrete parking lot, and be fine with it.
You can win with guys like that.
Yeah. So I think it really is. They're really going for a demeanor and going for a team-wide attitude. That and again, I say, who's that coach? I mean, is that Dave Tope? It could be
Mike Vrabel.
Well, Mike Vrabel is certainly a hard ass. There's no question.
Wilkes. Mike Vrabel is absolutely everything you think about in a former linebacker turned coach. Is that Josh McDaniels?
Yeah, I don't know.
Probably not, but we'll see.
Well, I mean, I think he has to. I think McDaniels. One thing, I don't know a lot about how he coaches his team, like behind closed doors, obviously. But one thing that's interesting with him is he's had to go toe to toe with Brady quite a bit and stand his ground. And Brady is basically number 2 in that organization behind Bill Belichick, right? I mean,
maybe number 1 based on a recent ESPN story by our friend Seth Wickersham.
That's true. He's at minimum,
right?
At minimum,
1B.
number 2,
right.
And Josh McDaniels has stood his ground and gone toe to toe with him. And I think look, what does that mean? I don't know, but I do think that organization values toughness, and they certainly have shown it. I mean, when the Colts have played the Patriots, there's been no question who's the tougher team.
Right.
So
Jonas Gray.
They place a premium on that in that organization. So maybe Josh McDaniels can provide that. I would think that you don't make this list if you're not a guy who can bring that to the table for Chris Ballard.
Yeah,
That's
and
my guess.
you know that Chris Ballard has been asking Jacoby Brissett maybe throughout the season and even in the last couple of weeks, what was it like working with Josh McDaniels? And he's asking everybody around, these candidates, what are they like on a day-to-day basis? He does have a peek into what Dave Toub was like, but it's really hard to predict which direction he's going to go in at this point. We know a lot about him, but this is his first hire, and it's a massive one.
Yep. So, unfortunately, we don't have a whole lot of detail. It's just hard to really project how this thing's going to go, and we're not going to step out there, as we said, and make prognostications like for what, just to look like idiots. So we're not going to do that. But I think we can, as we have been doing, talk theoretically and sort of broadly about what's going on. Look, there's a whole lot coming down the pike. Coaching staff, obviously, the draft. I'm already getting deluged with that. That's fine. It's actually going to be a really interesting conversation. I think
the draft and the combine are huge this year. All of a sudden, after being pretty forgettable the last couple of years.
Well, when you're sitting in the middle of the first round, it's kind of like,
Right. I mean,
or even late in the first round, right?
Yeah, I mean,
this is different.
All of a sudden, they're picking third. It's their highest pick since Andrew Luck arrived in 2012. Mm-hmm. And I was watching the national championship game the other night. Wow, the defensive talent on that field.
Yeah.
And then you think about Bradley Chubb, you think about Saquon Barkley. They're going to have options. They got to hire a coach first. They got to put a staff together first. Then the focus will shift to the draft, and that's a really, really sizable asset to have moving forward.
Yeah, and so look, questions about Andrew Luck, yes, but they've got the third pick. They've got $80-some million in cap space. I think they're going to spend it a little more freely this year. So this team's going to look a lot different, and the roster that we saw at the end of the year is not going to be the same. I mean, anytime you have a coaching change, for one, right, it changes.
The vibe's going to be totally different with
totally
Chuck
different
Pagano gone. It's going to be completely different. That's how it is with a guy who was here for 6 years. New coach, new staff. It's going to be completely different, and I think that's going to be a good thing for this franchise.
And there's no question that the first year with the new coach is going to be all about setting a tone. Whoever it is, it's going to be about setting a tone. So I think these guys better buckle up. And, look at the story that our colleague Jim Aiello did the other day. He interviewed Bill Polian about how these interviews are conducted and what the substance of these interviews are. It was actually very interesting. If you haven't read
it, make time. Bill Polian is great to listen to on these topics.
Yeah, click the Colts tab on our website and go there and find it. But anyhow, one of the things it's such a small thing he mentioned in there, but I picked up on this. One of the things he mentioned was he says he would have detailed questions down to how would you operate the Wednesday practice before a preseason game, right. And why does that matter? You might wonder, because I think that's how you instill the demeanor in your football team, right? How do you conduct practice? Are we going to go hard? Are we going to go long? What's it going to be like? How many periods? How much contact? And I think Chris Ballard has very specific answers he's looking for. Mm-hmm. So
every detail matters for a guy like Bill Polian. Yeah. There's a reason he's in the Hall of Fame. And I think Chris Ballard is a lot of, and based on what Jim Irsay has told us, there's a lot of Bill Polian and Chris Ballard.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So anyway, but I just think whoever that coach is going to be, they are, I think, going to bring a huge sea change to this team just in the way it operates. Doesn't mean they're going to be a lot better, worse, I don't know, but they're going to operate much, much differently. So we wait.
It's the first podcast we've done all year without really going into Andrew Luck.
Yeah, unfortunately that ball hasn't moved a whole lot yet. I think we'll probably hear something about that pretty soon.
Yeah.
Whether they volunteer the information, we'll see. But I would hope that Andrew Luck is already throwing or is getting ready to start throwing.
He should be by now. He did look like he'd added about 15 to 20 pounds of muscle since the last time we saw him when he returned from the Netherlands. But plenty to come on Andrew Luck moving forward.
Yeah. So that's it. This is still chopping wood, apparently. So we're going to go with that. And like I said, Chuck Pagano is forever in our hearts. He is the namesake. And where would we be without Chuck Pagano? We might not, I should say, have a podcast. So if you're good with it, I'm good with it.
I'm good with it.
All right. So there you have your answer. We've gotten a lot of questions about that, by the way.
I know.
Shout out to you guys.
I feel like we should give the people what they want.
I think so.
All 7 of them.
Yeah. So for you 7, dilly or something.
Right.
Thanks for listening to Stephen Holder with Zach Keefer.